Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Wyenberg. This time, we will continue our reading of Village Diary by Miss Reed. Miss Reed and her friends at the Women's Institute are part of a history pageant and have been asked to enact Ancient Britons and Romans. I'm sure we shall be able to arrange ancient Britons and Romans quite happily among ourselves, and I don't think we'll go any further with our plans tonight. It's getting late, and I know some of the mothers will want to get these young people off to bed. I propose that we have a first rehearsal and allot parts one day next week. Shall we say at the vicarage? There were murmurs of assent as people rose to their feet. Wednesday afternoon, shouted Mrs. Partridge above the noise. Clinic, bellowed someone. Thursday, then, persisted Mrs. Partridge in a stentorian tone. Market day, shrieked another. Monday, bellowed Mrs. Partridge indefatigably. The noise of scraping chairs and forms was unbelievable. Wash day, said someone, but she was howled down by a self-righteous group near the door with lungs of brass. Did ought to be finished by that time midday. Get mine done by 11. 8 to wash for, my girl. You can get there Monday afternoon if you get some move on. At last, Monday afternoon was decided upon. The children would have broken up by then, and those that could be press-ganged into the pageant service would be able to join their mothers in the fun at the vicarage. Mrs. Pringle, picking her way over the puddles as we emerged in a bunch from the hall, voiced her feelings on the proceedings. Heathenish lot of nonsense, boomed the familiar voice through the darkness. Furs and old sacks and bare feet. Why, my mother would turn in her grave to think of me tricked out so common. We was all brought up respectable. Our feet never so much as saw daylight except at Saturday bath night and getting into bed. Catch me exposing my extremities to the gaze of all and sundry, and like as not getting pneumonia into the bargain. In the brief pause for breath which followed this diatribe, a would-be peacemaker broke in. Perhaps you could be a Roman soldier, Mrs. Pringle. The snort that this meek suggestion brought forth would have done credit to an old war horse. And what would my figure look like hung about with a few bits of gilt cardboard? Demanded Mrs. Pringle majestically. It seemed best to assume this question was rhetorical and to be grateful for the merciful darkness which hid our faces. The last day of term is over. It was spent in the usual jubilant muddle of clearing desks, tidying cupboards, searching for lost books, and taking down pictures and charts from the schoolroom walls. The last part of the afternoon was devoted to drawing a picture about Easter. Each child was given a very small piece of rough paper and a pencil, as everything else was packed securely away for 3 weeks, and had to do the best they could with this meager ration. I expected a spate of Easter eggs, chicks, and the like, but was surprised by the various reactions to the word Easter. The most striking use of paper and pencil came from Patrick, who had carefully folded his paper in half to form an Easter card, which he finally presented to me. It showed 3 large tombstones with crosses and the letters R.I.P. printed crookedly across them, and inside was neatly printed, Happy Easter. I accepted this gloomy missive as gravely as I could. It had taken the artist half an hour and a good 1/4 inch of black lead pencil to execute it. When the pencils, too, had to be yielded up to the cupboard, we were reduced to the game of left and right, that incomparable standby of empty-handed and busy teachers. Linda Moffat supplied a hair grip and called upon Anne, her desk-mate, to guess which fist it was secreted in. She guessed correctly, took Linda's place, and the game followed its peaceful course with little attention from me. I was engrossed in adding up attendances for the term in the register. This wretched record does not hold the same fears for teachers these days as it did when I was a girl, but it still exercises a baleful influence on me, and early memories of trips to my first headmistress with a wrongly marked register in my trembling hand and instant dismissal hovering over me have set up a horrid complex toward registers as a whole. At the end of the afternoon, we made our special farewells to Mrs. Annett, and one of the Coggs twins presented her with a bouquet of daffodils, tulips, Easter daisies, and narcissi, which the children brought from their gardens. We shall miss her sorely. It has been decided by the managers to wait until after the summer holidays for the permanent appointment, when the newly trained young teachers will be out from the colleges. Meanwhile, I was delighted to hear from the vicar that Miss Clare will be with us for next term. This is good news indeed. I spent a very pleasant evening with the Annetts after pottering happily about all day, enjoying the freedom from school duties. I have turned out the cupboard under the stairs, one mad jumble of brooms, dusters, Primus stove, and might come in useful collections of pieces of brown paper, cardboard, carrier bags, and the like, and feel much elated. From the schoolroom came sounds of Mrs. Pringle at work scrubbing the floorboards. Above the clanking of the pail and the groaning of heavy desks being shunted across the room, Mrs. Pringle's carrying contralto could be heard raised in pious song, ranging from "A few more years shall roll" to "Oft in danger, oft in woe." It was very pleasant to take my time over tea and dressing. The little car goes well now, and gone are the days when I imagined knots of children playing marbles in the middle of the road around each corner, and held my breath when another car approached. In fact, I felt quite the dashing driver as I swept into Beech Green's school empty playground and slammed the car door shut, only to realize I had left my keys inside. Luckily, the other door was unlocked, so all was well, but I went in a more humble mood across to the schoolhouse next door. It is very much more comfortable now that Mrs. Annett is there to run the house, and I remember my first visit there, when Mr. Annett was officially looked after by a housekeeper, and how I had noticed the general neglect. Now the furniture gleamed, and fresh flowers scented the house. In the corner, Mrs. Annett's violin stood beside Mr. Annett's cello. They are both keen members of the Caxley Orchestra, but Mrs. Annett will probably not be able to take part next season when she has a young baby to look after. Their radiogram is a great joy to them, and we played Mr. Annett's new records until supper time. After supper, we fell to talking about country schools, and I was interested to hear that Beech Green is developing the practical farming side with even more vigor. "If I have to have the children here until they're 15, said Mr. Annett, "and I have no woodwork shop, no place for metalwork, and mighty little other equipment, then I must find something that is worthwhile for them to do, and from which they will learn. Otherwise, they'll be bored and surly. Luckily, we've plenty of land here, enough for a large vegetable plot, and we've got permission to keep hens, ducks, and pigs as well." I knew that Beech Green School had sent garden produce to Caxley Market for some years, but the livestock was something quite new. "We've been given a small grant from the county," he went on, "and our profit from the market has helped. The boys have made really fine coops and runs, which have involved quite a bit of practical arithmetic, and the way the accounts are kept is a miracle of bookkeeping. The pigs have only just arrived. Bricklaying took longer than we thought for the sties, and we had a bit of trouble with the concrete yards, but they should bring us in a substantial profit later. The leftovers from school dinners form a major part of their diet. You must bring a party over from Fairacre School to see our farming when it's really working." I promised that I would, and as I drove home, the sound good sense behind Mr. Annett's scheme for these older rural pupils impressed me more and more. One thing that he had said I found particularly significant. "I started by using these out-of-door and practical activities as a means to defeat apathy. After all, for generations, most country children of 14 and over have been out in the world earning their living. It is not surprising that today some still resent being kept at school, particularly if there's nothing new or absorbing to learn offered them. But the surprising thing is this: the defeat of apathy is only a byproduct, for this itself is real education for the majority of Beech Green children. Working with these methods brings out the patience, the endurance, and the innate sagacity of the countryman. And all the time I am working with, not against, the grain, as I so often felt I was when I urged them along reluctantly with bookwork for which they had little sympathy. Mr. Annett is a townsman by birth and breeding, so that it is all the more remarkable that he has stumbled on this truth after a relatively short time as a country dweller. But there are hundreds of rural school teachers from Land's End to John O'Groats who will endorse his views and who know that the education of the countryman is a matter which must be given immediate and intelligent thought. Land today in England is more precious than ever before. It is our heritage and in trust for future generations. It is only right that it should be tilled and cared for by people who are not only capable and trained for this work, but who also are happy and contented to live among the farms and fields which give them their livelihood, and, even more, a deep inner satisfaction. Rural education must be tackled realistically if the drift to the towns is to stop. In this way, village life will come into its own again, not as a picturesque setting for weekend visitors to enjoy when they come down in some cases to see how a most satisfactory way of income tax evasion is getting on, but as a vital working unit. The first rehearsal at the vicarage went splendidly. Mrs. Partridge said that she felt we really ought to get used to going barefoot, so that we removed our shoes with varying degrees of reluctance and left them on the veranda while we hobbled painfully over the gravel to the comparative comfort of the lawn, where we sat down to discuss casting plans. It was decided that 12 of our more comely members would constitute the invading Roman force, and the rest would be ancient Britons of both sexes. I watched Mrs. Partridge running an appraising eye over the legs of the assembled company, rather as the local trainers do as they watch their racehorses on the gallops above Fairacre. Mrs. Moffat, that brave volunteer to the ancient Britons' ranks, was persuaded to be pack leader, captain, or whatever the Roman equivalent might be for the one in charge, instead. She is tall and carries herself well, and her legs are impeccable. Mrs. Partridge obviously feared that there might be an ugly rush for the other 11 places, for she spoke firmly to Mrs. Pratt when she rose from her seat on the lawn. "Now, please, Mrs. Pratt, I do want you to be a rather influential ancient Briton woman, who with possibly a bundle of faggots. So will you forego being a Roman?" Mrs. Pratt looked mildly surprised. "I only got up because I was sitting on a thistle," she said in some bewilderment. Mrs. Partridge said she'd quite misunderstood her gesture, and were there any volunteers. As usual in Fairacre, the word volunteers struck temporary paralysis upon its hearers, and we all sat, eyes glazed, limbs frozen, like so many flies in amber. It was quite apparent that far from there being an ugly rush to the Roman standard, Fairacre WI had elected to be ancient Britons to a woman. At last Mrs. Partridge broke the silence. "Miss Reed, would you be a Roman?" I said that I should be delighted to be called to the colors at my age. This seemed to break the ice a little, and 2 young women who cycle over from Springbourne to our meetings offered to join the ranks too. Gradually our 12 were collected, and if some of us were a trifle long in the tooth, at least we were reasonably athletic. There had been an awkward moment when Mrs. Pringle had boomed a grudging offer of martial assistance, but Mrs. Partridge had turned temporarily deaf, and as Mrs. Fowler from Tyler's Row spoke up at the same time, all was well. "Now," said Mrs. Partridge brightly, "if you Romans would sit over here near the rose bed, but do mind your nylons, we shall know where we are. We shall need to work out how much cardboard we shall require for armor, but that must wait for another time." "Breastplates and backplates should be enough," said one of the Springbourne girls. "And helmets," said the other. "And greaves," said Mrs. Moffat. "Graves?" boomed Mrs. Pringle from the ancient Britons' camp opposite. "Graves? We having a war, then? If so, I tell you straight, my leg won't stand up to it." "Leg pads, like in cricket," volunteered a nephew of Mr. Rogers at the Forge, who attends Caxley Grammar School and is well up in greaves, helmets, and other martial garments. Mrs. Pringle snorted her disgust. "Got quite enough on me leg with my elastic stocking," said that lady, "without getting myself dolled up in wicket-keeper's rubbish." With brilliant dash, Mrs. Partridge put all to rights. "You won't need to be bothered with leg pads, Mrs. Pringle. As an ancient Briton, I want you to be the mother of the chief warrior, a most important person, and you will sit on a kind of throne by the campfire, which won't try your poor leg that you're always so brave about, and generally keep an eye on the rest of the tribe." Mrs. Pringle allowed herself to be mollified, and something very like a gratified smirk spread over her dour features. It is no wonder that Mrs. Partridge is elected annually as our president. No one else can touch her for spontaneous and inspired diplomacy. A nasty little wind had sneaked up, and the children were beginning to get restive. It was thought best to have a rudimentary rehearsal of the scene at once. "You must pretend to have weapons and tools," shouted Mrs. Partridge above the general movement. "One of you boys fetch a stool for Mrs. Pringle, and that flower urn can be the campfire." Slowly the ancient Britons began to move shamefacedly about their occupations, their children tending to stand about with broad grins on their faces and with many a giggle behind hands. Mrs. Pringle squatted in an unlovely attitude on her small stool and folded her arms regally. Other women stirred imaginary pots, washed imaginary clothes, swept imaginary floors, and occasionally cuffed far from imaginary children who crossed their path. Meanwhile, we Roman soldiers formed a ragged column behind the laurel bushes awaiting our entrance. We waited until one of the tribesmen had returned to his fellows, showing by gestures that we were about to descend upon them. The ancient Britons were then supposed to point toward us dramatically, making low, uncouth cries at the same time as they bunched together in trepidation. The low, uncouth cries they did rather well, as dramatically outflung arms hit nearby bodies with considerable force. At a nervous command from our leader, Mrs. Moffat, we marched into action from behind the laurels. The fact that some of us had started on the left and some on the right, that we were all too close and tended to trip each other up, did not enhance our warlike aspect. But never can a Roman cohort have been so polite, and it was quite pretty to hear us all apologizing to each other as we stumbled along. We approached our future captives, smiling faintly upon them. They beamed back, and we all mingled together in the happiest fraternity round the flower urn and Mrs. Pringle. Mrs. Partridge clapped her hands, and we sat down thankfully. "Very good indeed," she said with the greatest vigor. "I think it's a wonderful beginning. When the soldiers have got their cardboard armor on and their kilts—" Mr. Rogers' nephew, as a coming classics man, shuddered and turned pale. "And the ancient Britons are wearing their old fur and dreary hair, I think we shall all be quite—" She searched for the exact word, looked it over, found it good, and flung it at us triumphantly. "Quite irresistible." Flown with such heady praise, we all returned in great good spirits to our homes. May. As usual, the holidays slipped by in a golden haze. Apart from 4 crowded days in London, staying with a married friend with 3 young children, and having the excitement of an evening at the ballet, shopping and meals out, I spent the rest of the time here at the schoolhouse. The garden is at its best, and the fruit trees, planted by those who taught at Fairacre long ago, are a mass of pink and white blossom. Mr. Willett and all the other good gardeners pull long faces and say, "Don't like to see it so early, bound to get some late frosts, mark my words." A blackbird has built a nest in the lilac bush near the gate, so idiotically low that Tibby is much interested and spends his time glowering upon the foolish bird from the top of the gate. I've tried to screen it with hazel boughs, but with little success. At my suggestion to Mr. Willett that I might drape it with netting from the fruit cage, he looked at me pityingly, blew out his ragged old mustache, and said, "Why not let the poor cat have a good meal? He's waited patient enough, hasn't he?" Mrs. Pringle came to give me a hand with some spring cleaning during the holidays, which she did with much puffing and blowing. To hear her disparaging comments on the condition of the backs of the bookcases and the loot that she extracted from the sides of the armchairs, one might wonder I hadn't died of typhus. Mrs. Hope, what lived here in my young days, though an ailing woman with a child and a husband with a failing, she told me as she hauled out the loose cover from the cracks of the sofa, never had so much as a biscuit crumb in her folds, they being brushed out regular twice a week, as is necessary for common cleanliness. To add point to this stricture, she jerked out the last bit of cover and projected a light shower of crumbs, biscuit or otherwise, 2 pencils, a safety pin, a knitting needle, and a licorice all-sort upon the carpet. I was unrepentant. Term is now a week old. The children look all the better for their freedom and fresh air, and it is very pleasant to have Miss Clare back again in the infants' room, where she reigned for so many years. However, it is not without certain small difficulties. The children are used to Mrs. Annet's more modern methods and have been allowed to move about the classroom, to talk a little, and to make much more noise than Miss Clare will allow. They are finding Miss Clare's more formal methods rather irksome. "Can we play shops?" I heard Joseph Coggs ask as I was collecting Miss Clare's savings money. "Mrs. Annet lets us play shops instead of writing down sums." His dark eyes were fixed pleadingly upon her. "I think we'll have table practice first," was the kind but firm answer, and Joseph trailed back to his desk with a pouting under lip. "Do use all the apparatus that is here," I said, waving to the desk load of sugar cartons, cocoa tins, and the like that constitute the shop at that side of the room. "And don't worry about the noise. My children don't take any notice of a little hum next door." My gentle hints were of no avail. I could see from Mrs. Clare's quizzical glance that she knew exactly what was going on inside my head, and knew, too, that she was too old a dog to learn new tricks, even if she felt they were the right ones, which, in this case, she doubts. In a week or two, the children will have become accustomed to a slower, steadier regime and will respond to Miss Clare's methods as well as earlier generations of Fairacre children have done. Meanwhile, I have offered to take her class as well as my own for the games and physical training lessons, for not only is this too much of a strain on her elderly and delicate heart, but the small children revel in scampering and jumping and using the wealth of individual apparatus, balls, hoops, skipping ropes, and the like, which they miss sorely in the formal 4 lines for head, arms, legs, and trunk exercises, which are used for the major part of Miss Clare's lessons. It has not been easy to persuade Miss Clare to part with any of her duties, for she is the most conscientious woman alive. But after some demurring, she acquiesced not only in this matter, but also in my suggestion that she rested for 20 minutes on my sofa during the dinner hour. It took some lurid word painting on my behalf of my own predicament if she should have an attack in school time to make her agree to this measure. But a lucky thought of mine that she should make a pot of tea for us both at the end of the 20 minutes, which would also be the end of my midday playground duty, just turned the balance. And the daily rest means she returns to her afternoon session much refreshed. My class this term has been enriched by the addition of an 8-year-old American boy. His parents returned to the United States in what he calls the fall. On first hearing this expression, Patrick, more scripturally minded than most, began asking complicated questions about the Garden of Eden, which he was obviously confusing with Earl's native land, and was considerably surprised and slightly disappointed on being told that this was only another name for autumn. The Fairacre children have taken Earl very much under their wing. He is a most attractive little boy with a crew cut, a cheerful grin, and no trace of shyness. He appeared on the second morning with 2 pistols slung on a formidable studded holster round his checked jeans. I broke it to him as gently as I could that I did not allow guns, knives, bows and arrows, or other weapons on school premises, though of course he could do as he liked at home. I was conscious of the exchange of disgusted glances among my class, where this old sore still rankles. But Earl parted with his holster with a grin that crinkled his eyes engagingly. He put it with a resounding clank of pistolry on the old desk at the side of the room, among the paper bags containing 11s and other less lethal toys that had been brought for playtime. There is an amusing sequel to this incident. At playtime, I sat alone in the classroom marking history test papers when I became conscious of voices in the adjoining lobby. "Never you mind, Earl," said Eric earnestly. "Us'll play cowboys with you tonight down the wreck. That old Miss Reed," he spoke witheringly, "she treats us awful. Don't let us do nothin'. A proper old spoil sport." "Ah, well," came Earl's good-natured drawl, "I guess teachers is teachers everywhere." He spoke as one who has suffered in the past and is resigned, fairly cheerfully, to suffering in the future. "Don't you bring him no more, though," warned Eric. "The old girl locks him up in the cupboard till the end of term and kicks up horrid." His voice, dark with foreboding, suddenly took on a more jubilant tone. "Tell you what, come play Indians up the coke pile." And with joyous whoopings, this enlightening conversation came to an end. Imagine my surprise to learn the American boy's name. We will follow his adventures further next time.